Hi there, welcome to The Real Agenda with me, Tom Burgess. Thanks for joining us and I hope you're keeping safe and well. Now in today's show we'll be talking about tax with Robert Palmer, the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK. And they've just completed a new report, interestingly enough, called Talking Tax. Now it seems that Conservative voter support for higher taxes has gone up during the lockdown. And there are now more Conservative voters supportive of a range of taxes on wealth, and more so than the general public. We'll be finding out more about that from Robert in a moment. It's good to be back with our new series of The Real Agenda with Tom Burgess. That's me. And it's a big thanks to so many of you. We've seen so many more people like you be listening to the Real Agenda Network over recent months, not just in the UK, but around the world, and particularly in North America. So special thanks to you, our North American friends. And there's plenty to choose from on the Real Agenda Network. We offer a range of related shows on this channel from organisations like Compass, Compassion in Politics, the Equality Trust. That one's just about to start very soon. Our Tax Justice Network, and Taxpayers Against Poverty, as well as Unlock Democracy, and we're adding more each month. So here at the Real Agenda Network, we aim to inform, inspire and involve those of you who want a democratic, inclusive and fairer society that respects human rights and protects the planet. And I'm glad that's you. So thanks indeed for joining us. And you can also hear our shows on podcast radio, which has a reach of 12 million people in London and the South East England. You can find out more about them at thepodcastradio.co.uk. And a reminder of what's coming up soon on The Real Agenda. We will be talking to Gavin Esler, the ex-BBC Newsnight presenter, author and one-time candidate for the European Parliament, about what is wrong with Britain and what we need to do to put it right. And this will include a sneak preview of his new book that he's currently researching, just finishing off, due out in February. But on with the show. But before we speak to Robert, let's just consider what is the right thing to do. Now, a bit of a news item here. On the 10th of September, Francis O'Grady, the TUC's General Secretary, said that it would be morally wrong if the government did not follow through with plans to raise the national living wage from £8.72 to £9.21 an hour from April 2021. Now, the Low Pay Commission, which recommends minimum wage rates for the government, is said to be considering its recommendation made in March reconsidering its recommendation made in March because of the pandemic has taken a heavy toll on jobs. Francis O'Grady argued that scrapping plans to raise the living wage was not the right approach. It would be completely morally wrong and from a government point of view bad politics, she said. 7 in 10 social care workers are on less than £10 an hour. The very idea that they are the ones that miss out on precious pennies would be a disaster. Now, according to the Living Wage Foundation, the real living wage, that's based on what it costs to actually live, the basic living expenses, should currently be £9.30 an hour, and even more next year. Now, the next day in the Times newspaper, under the heading, "We won't beat poverty by passing the problem to the corporate sector," columnist Oliver Cam commented, "It's hard to justify forcing companies to bear the cost of a sharp rise in the floor for wages, when this may force many of them, by no means bad employers, out of business. The best course is for government to switch the outlays it's spending at present on subsidising wages to make universal credit more generous." Actually, I don't quite understand that. I would just comment that it makes no sense as universal credit effectively does subsidise wages as well as giving support to those who are not earning. So Oliver is suggesting that the government, or rather the taxpayer, should top up low pay and therefore subsidise company profit, or indeed in some cases minimise losses. If businesses cannot afford to pay wages, this is me talking, not Oliver, if businesses cannot afford to pay wages that are enough for people to live off, then it needs to revise its business model. And when you actually look at the figures, a rise from £8.72 to £9.21 is a rise of 6%. And for full-time work, that would equate to £1,000 a year, or about £80 per calendar month. Very valuable to low earners, and it would be spent in the economy. According to KPMG, there are over 5 million workers who are on below the real living wage. And if they're all full-time, which I don't believe they are, then that would equate to £5 billion per year. A huge benefit for those affected. That's £5 billion. A huge benefit for those affected and also to the economy. You can find out more about the living wage at livingwage.org.uk. Seeking minimum income standards for those in work as well as those unable to work is a key goal of the campaigning group Taxpayers Against Poverty, founded by my friend the late Paul Nicholson, who organised the first research into these standards in the 90s, and it then became the real living wage. So let's hear from Robert. Now, Robert Palmer is the Executive Director of Tax Justice UK, a spin-off of the global campaigning group Tax Justice Network. I am particularly interested in the work on tax justice and very pleased to be a technical advisor to Tax Justice UK. And also, the Real Agenda Network distributes Taxcast, the monthly podcast from Tax Justice Network. I kicked off by asking Robert how things were going.
Very interesting times. I mean, who'd have thought you'd have leaks that a Conservative Chancellor was considering a range of higher taxes on wealth. Lots of interest in the run-up to the budget and in the context of COVID about what we do about public spending, about tax, about a whole range of issues that perhaps are on the agenda in the way that they might not have been before.
What were the key findings of the report?
So the key findings of our new report were, first of all, the public is fed up with austerity. We heard across the country, both through our polling and focus groups, that people want to see much more investment in their local areas. And if anything, the coronavirus crisis has really enhanced that and made people really back the idea of more public spending. And along with that, we also found that people were prepared to see tax rises. Almost half of the people we surveyed in our poll said that they were personally prepared to pay more tax. And we also found very high levels of support for people who thought that wealthy people should be taxed more. One of the things that was quite surprising, perhaps, was actually support for a whole range of higher taxes on wealth was, in fact, higher from Conservative voters. So on things such as increasing corporation tax, increasing capital gains tax, making pensions tax relief less generous for higher earners. On all of those issues, we found Conservative voters were more in favour than the general public. So
why do you think that is?
I think there are two things that come to mind. Firstly, that the Conservative coalition that Boris Johnson put together during the December 2019 election is fairly relatively left-wing on economic issues. A lot of the seats that the Conservatives won were in traditional Labour heartlands in the North and in the Midlands. And if you look at other public attitudes research, you consistently find that all of those voters are relatively left-wing. I also wonder whether, it matters who is making the argument. And I suspect there's, to some extent, Conservative voters feel more comfortable with a Conservative government increasing taxes or reforming the tax system in a way that they may feel less comfortable if it was a Labour government. So I think those two things, the country is fairly left in economics, including the new Conservative coalition, and also perhaps, and this is a suspicion rather than necessarily backed up by lots of evidence, a suspicion that voters feel more comfortable supporting increased spending and tax rises if they support the government doing those moves.
What sort of taxes are you suggesting on wealth?
There's lots of different ways in which you can tax wealth, and we tested a whole range of them. So, for example, you could increase corporation tax, which is an indirect tax on wealth often. You could ensure that income from wealth, so particularly capital gains, are taxed at the same level as income from work. At the moment, there are a lot of well-off higher earners who can take their income as capital gains and pay much lower tax rates. Another area is around pensions. Pensions often boring topic that make people feel very nervous, but it's really important. It's one of the biggest stores of wealth in our country is our private pensions. And at the moment, higher taxpayers get more of a government bonus, higher levels of tax relief than ordinary voters. So there's this range of different, we also asked about reforming council tax, or tied to a home's current value. We tested the idea of a mansion tax on homes worth over £2 million. So there's a whole range of ideas out there on how you could tax wealth more. And on most of them, people were pretty supportive. One that really stands out where people really don't like it is inheritance tax. And I think it's something for progressives and for those who believe in inheritance tax to really think hard about is why, when you ask people about inheritance tax, do you find 60 or 70% of people saying that they don't like it?
That's particularly strange, really, when you consider that it affects only quite a small number of people, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I mean, I think part of it is that people's knowledge of the tax system is fairly limited. So there are people who think that they pay inheritance tax when in fact they really don't or aren't likely to. But I also think there's a deeper thing here that is important to think about, which is that something that our research found is that a lot of people, associate wealth and accumulating wealth with security, with looking after themselves and their family. And so to some extent, it's less about being able to spend lots and lots of conspicuous consumption. And it's about like that kind of really, I suppose, understandable desire to look after yourself and your family. And inheritance tax is seen as getting in the way of that. I think those making the case for higher taxes on wealth need to think quite carefully about how they make the argument and the type of language they're using.
But how do you convince the wealthy to pay more?
So I think part of it is about pointing out where the rich and the well-off get unfair advantages in the tax system. An example of where the rich get unfair advantages is when it comes to something like capital gains tax. So there, if you're really rich, you can turn your income into capital gains and pay a much lower tax rate. You can, I think, make quite a clear argument that this is an unfair, almost arbitrary advantage that the rich get. Another example might be around pension tax relief, where if you're a higher rate earner, you get more government subsidy for your pension than if you're a basic rate earner. So I think we can talk about kind of like almost the mechanics of the tax system and making it fairer and making it make more sense. I mean, I think you can also argue that from a broader point, that inequality is bad for the country, it's bad for politics, it's bad for business, that having measures to tackle inequality, such as higher taxes on wealth, are a really important way of building social cohesion and political stability. And that rich people need to really, really think about how our society is set up and who are the winners and who are the losers.
With the capital gains tax, it seems like a no-brainer that it should be taxed the same as income tax. So why doesn't this happen?
Well, I think there's this argument that gets made, which is quite powerful, which is that the way to attract investment is by just having very low tax rates. And actually, I think it's really important that we challenge that premise. And, you have other countries such as Germany, which has done very well, has got a much stronger industrial base than the UK, and they have much higher taxes. And so I think we need to challenge this idea, this orthodoxy that the way of encouraging investment is just having ever lower taxes, because whatever, lower taxes, it hollows out the state, it hollows out the sort of public sphere and the way in which we all look after each other and the way in which we build and support our communities. And so I think that's a really important thing to challenge. And I think it's, I'm cautiously optimistic that you've got a government, including a Conservative government, that has an agenda that's focused on levelling up forgotten parts of the country, on supporting those who have less. At the moment, a lot of this is rhetoric, but I think it's good to see that direction of travel and really talking about, the power of good that government can do and the power of good you can have through, for example, a reformed tax system.
Another one is council tax. I mean, this is like 30 years out of date. And there's been a lot of talk about reviewing that, but still nothing.
Exactly. And council tax is, as you say, it's 30 years out of date. It's based on property values woefully out of date. And it actually, the way that it's currently set up, it really hurts people in poorer areas and poorer communities who end up paying more proportionally than those in richer areas. And there's a lot of agreement from economists and policy experts on changing council tax so it more accurately reflects the value of properties now. The challenge is really political, is that politicians are really nervous about engaging in council tax reform and perhaps see very little upside to the reform and a lot of political cost. And I think that's true across the board when it comes to tax reform is that there's real, often nervousness around changing the tax system in a substantial way because of the fear around political costs. But I think politicians are not going to be able to duck some of these big questions for long, because we have an expanding state. All political parties are now committed to spending more money, and we have demographic health trends even before coronavirus, which meant it was likely the government was going to spend more. And so that really does bring questions of taxation to the fore. I am hopeful that we are going to continue to have conversations about how we have a fairer tax system. And for us, that means taxing wealth more and in a fairer way.
And one of the issues you said is actually communicating. People don't understand the tax system, and therefore how are we going to get reform if people don't understand it? We've got a big communications exercise. Is that right?
There's definitely a communications exercise. I mean, our research did find that, if you explain things to people do get it. But I also think politicians, it's their job to make the big picture case for the types of reforms that are needed, and then build trust in the public to support the details. And I think the fact that we're starting to see Rishi Sunak as the Chancellor talking about the need to think about tax changes is a helpful first step, and that we then need to clearly communicate some principles around how we reform taxes and what a reform tax system looks like. And this is a conversation that is going to be a big political conversation for a long time to come. What type of state do we want? How do we fund it? What role does tax play in that? I mean, I think one of the things that is really important to say is right now, there is no need to raise taxes to pay for COVID, which some people are claiming. We've got very, very cheap levels of government debt. And this is all about thinking in the longer term, how do we support a bigger state? How do we have a tax system that is focused on tackling inequality as well as some of the other things that we need from our tax system?
So it's like rebalancing the tax system rather than just putting taxes up or down.
Exactly, rebalancing. And I think you need to look in the round. So it's a mixture of rebalancing the tax system, but also ensuring that we're spending the amounts that are needed to support people and to use the government's language to really support this levelling up agenda. You could have higher taxes while at the same time you are spending more money, and that would make a lot of sense.
If the Chancellor called you in tomorrow, what would be the first? What would be the three key things that you would say you must do this?
Yes, I mean, I think the obvious thing is ensuring that wealth and income from wealth is taxed at the same level as income from work. It's, as you say, it feels totally nonsensical that if you've got income from wealth, you pay a lower tax rate. So that's one thing. And then secondly, I think they need to look at the way we tax pensions. It might not be very sexy, but it's a really important part of the puzzle. And then finally, I think it's about setting out a long-term set of priorities and the way in which you're going to do taxes. And I think that's also important, so that it's not just endless ad hoc changes, but you're really giving a bit of a roadmap and a picture about what a reform tax system should look like and what principles that tax system will be designed by.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about tax reform. I mean, there's always talk about tax reform, but you're putting forward the justice argument, like what is fair. Haven't we already done enough on what the sort of roadmap should be? And really, shouldn't it be now about implementations? If your third point, you're saying about a roadmap, and I'm looking for a point that says we're going to do this.
Well, I mean, I could give you more examples. I think fixing council tax is something that really needs to happen.
Okay, I'll take that one. I think that's a good one. I think that certainly needs doing, because that affects so many people, doesn't it? I mean, if you abolish council tax or changed it, and even if it was renters, like in years ago, only be landowners, and so that's like 30% of the population taken out of paying council tax as we now know it, which makes a huge difference to them and very little difference to everybody else.
There's a campaign called Fairer Share. Have a look. They've got a website that's all about council tax reform.
Funny you should mention that, because we're talking to Andrew Dixon from Fairer Share.
Oh, fantastic!
Next week, or recording that next week, and obviously have had a few conversations with him anyway about that.
Fantastic.
Yeah, to me that seems, although an ultimate land value tax would be appropriate, this is a step in the right direction. So let's hope his campaign will move forward too. So okay,
so.
we've taken three things there. So what happens next? I mean, there's a lot of reports. You've done a great report here. What happens next? What can we do about it to get these changes in greater justice in the tax system?
So I think we need to keep up the political pressure and find ways on showing to the Chancellor that higher taxes and wealth is both possible and will be popular with the public, and so people can raise their voice and say, yes, this is what we want. We do, as part of the sort of society we want to see as we build back from coronavirus. We're due a budget in November. That will be an opportunity for the Chancellor to set out his vision for the tax system. He may not do specific changes then because, we're likely to still be in the coronavirus crisis. But I think that is a moment to really kind of like set out his stall for the ultimate direction of travel. So keeping up pressure, demonstrating that this is something that is politically possible and popular with the public, I think is important.
Thanks very much indeed for that briefing, Robert. Very interesting, and good luck with the report, and hopefully it's another initiative that help move change forward and make people more aware of what can be done for a more equitable society. You can find out more information and see a copy of the report at taxjustice.uk. So there may seem to be some hope that our tax system may be rebalanced, or is it just more talk? As Robert suggests, politicians are too scared and find it too electorally risky to really tackle tax. But now is the time to man up, bite the bullet, do the right thing, and ensure that wealth we all help create is shared more equitably, and that we don't take money off low earners who just do not have enough to live on. Let's hope that the political parties don't just follow the mantra of no tax increases in recession, but rather focus on rebalancing taxes by taking less from lower income earners and more from wealth. So more funds are put into circulation in the economy rather than being stored away and not being used very efficiently. So what do you think? Do contact us at info@realagendaradio.org or via our website, realagenda.org. We'd love to hear your views, and we hope we will help to inform, involve and inspire you into action. Coming up soon on The Real Agenda, we've got Gavin Esler, author and former BBC Newsnight presenter, talking about what is wrong with Britain and how to fix it. We'll also be speaking to Andrew Dixon from Fairer Share about their proposal for a proportional property tax and the abolition of council tax and stamp duty. And in coming weeks, here are just some of the people you'll be hearing from. Jennifer Nadel, co-founder of Compassion in Politics and former ITN Home Affairs editor. Dr. Gail Bradbrook, co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. Julian Richer, the entrepreneur and author. Stephen Kinnock, MP, now in the Shadow Cabinet, as well as Oxford University Professor Danny Dorlin, and more. So do listen in. In each episode, you will hear from campaigners, commentators, politicians, academics and journalists about fixing the fundamental problems of our time and what we can do to end an unnecessary hardship suffered by millions every day, because that's the real agenda. And you can find out more at realagenda.org or contact us on info@realagendaradio.org. Now, The Real Agenda is partnered with the Coalition for Economic Justice, a network of like-minded groups campaigning for a fairer society that seek more equitable access to the prosperity created by us all. The coalition seeks to build strength and unity by finding common ground to create awareness that real change is possible through a collaborative, inclusive and non-partisan approach. A special thanks to our sponsors, Reverse Media Group, one of the fastest growing search and media companies. Find out why at reversemediagroup.com. And don't just take my word for it. Reverse Media Group was just listed by the Sunday Times as one of the fastest growing private tech companies in the UK. Now, one thing is certain, people want to see change to a more compassionate and just society, as well as more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's urgent, and it's up for us to make it happen. Because that's the real agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for that, Robert. Good to hear from you. More info you can